for these ideas of freedom that we're often told, right? We're told the story of colonization through the Puritans and people who were seeking religious freedom. That was part of it. But the original folks were coming here because of land, because they were on a small continent. The English had this tiny little island, and so most white people had no access to land or property. By coming here, you have an abundance of land, but land without labor is useless, right? So if you have all of this land but no one to work the land, you can't get money out of the land. So African people were brought here because there weren't enough Europeans to work all of this land. And Europeans were not trying to work under the conditions that were required. So slavery was an economic system designed to extract wealth from black labor and black intellect and redistribute that wealth to white individuals, the government, which was run by white people, and white institutions. And that is also the same thing for the period that we call Jim Crow, which Jim Crow is a euphemism, of course. It makes you think of something kind of benign, but Jim Crow was a system of violently enforced racial apartheid. That's what it was. And that 100-year period was to try to maintain black people as an exploitable class of labor for as long as possible. So you can't have slavery, but you can try to recreate as close as you can the conditions of slavery. So if we understand that both of these systems were designed to take wealth from black communities and redistribute that wealth to white people, then it becomes clear why reparations is necessary. The reparations is not just about racism, though racism is one of the reasons we are deserving of redress, but it is also at its basis about trying to restore the economic theft that black Americans have experienced generationally. There's never been a time, you have to imagine, there's a historian, her name is Carrie Lee Merritt, she says that black Americans were the only people probably in the history of the world who held close to zero wealth. Because at freedom, what is freedom? At abolition, 95% of the black population in the United States was enslaved, which was rare. The other countries in the Americas allowed more black people to become free than we did. We actually just believed black people were a slave race, and so the condition of black people should be that they will be in bondage. And so we are granted liberation, abolition, with nothing. And Frederick Douglass says, never in the history of the world have people been granted their freedom with so little, right? No housing, no employment, no land, you've not been able to acquire any property, and then you're told to be free and just compete with everyone else. But then we put in a 100-year system of racial apartheid that ensures you can't compete with everyone else. So that is the basis. And then as the scholar was saying, on top of that, the miraculous thing is that out of slavery, with no wealth as a people, we still are building institutions, right? We still are creating black towns. Because frankly, the last thing black people wanted to do out of freedom was live around white people. I mean, they really did. These are the people who had enslaved you, and even in a state like Illinois, where you didn't have rampant slavery, slavery was in the south of the state, but not in the north. Black people weren't free. Black people were treated as equal citizens. So black people wanted to form their own black communities, their own black towns, and as we all know, those towns were systematically destroyed. Land stolen, property damaged, any wealth they were able to acquire was taken again and again. And so then we get to a modern society where the black-white wealth gap is $1 on every $10 that white Americans have, and we want to blame black people's spending habits. Black people could buy Jordans every day for the rest of their lives, right? And if you stop doing that, you won't close the racial wealth gap by an inch. So this really is about an acknowledgement of the fact that black people live in a forced wealth poverty that was created by policy, created by law, and created by private action. And black people are owed restitution, not just for slavery, as Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I think has to get credit in many ways for bringing reparations back to kind of the center of the political conversation. Yes, he definitely And of course, he tells a story right here from Chicago, and he's not making an argument about slavery. What he's making an argument is about what black people had to do, or because their ancestors had been been enslaved, because they are descendants of slavery, that they had to endure a system of segregation, of exploitation in the housing market, and that you could make the case for reparations without ever even having to go back to slavery. Now, I think it's both, obviously, and it's also, according to the UN standards, it's the ongoing harm that descendants of slavery are still having to go through. Like, we have never stopped the harm. But that is why we are all here, is to understand that the conditions Black Americans live in are not about Black pathology. They're not about what we won't do as a community. Anytime you start to think Black people are uniquely in love with crime, uniquely don't care if our kids have quality schools, uniquely love poverty, uniquely don't want to work, that's racism. It's white supremacy. It's not based on fact. What we are is we're the only people in this country who had to endure 250 years of chattel slavery and 100 years of racial apartheid. And any thinking person would then say that a debt has to be paid for what has been done to Black people.